Hello, everyone, and welcome to our third installment in our author series. Our author this afternoon is Miss Jenny Hubbard. Miss Hubbard is the author of the books Paper Covers Rock and We Stay. Miss Hubbard has been kind enough to donate some of her time and speak with us. If you have any questions for her, please send them to our Twitter at ImpactWritersHQ, and we will ask them on your behalf at the end. So without further ado, Miss Jenny Hubbard. Again, we are having some technical difficulties this afternoon. Please give us a minute while we try to sort those out, and she will be with us as soon as possible. Thank you. It should take just a little bit longer as Miss Hubbard is just, we're trying to get her connected. 1 second, please.
Hi.
It should take just a little bit longer as Miss Hubbard is just, we're trying to get her connected.
Here I am. Sorry about that.
It should take
Hi.
just a little bit longer as Miss Hubbard is just, we're trying to get her connected.
Here I am. Sorry about that.
That's okay, Miss Hubbard. Thank you for joining us. So if you'd like to go ahead with your presentation, it'd be great.
Sure. Am I okay? It's so strange to see my face up here. My name is Jenny Hubbard, and I write novels.
Just a little bit longer as Miss Hubbard.
Am I on now?
We can see you again, Miss Hubbard.
Okay, great. All right, here we go. After all that, you can call me Jenny, by the way. I write novels for young adults, and my first book, it's going to be upside down, Paper Covers Rock. Let me see if I can do that. Paper, oh shoot. I'm a technological neophyte.
On now. We can see you again, Miss Hubbard.
Okay, great. Okay. All right, here we go. I keep hearing myself talk back to me things I said a few minutes ago, so I'm trying to talk over myself, which is an odd feeling. I write novels for young adults, and my first book.
Do you happen to have the other window open still?
Rock. Let me see.
Close that window. It should.
Okay. I closed the other window. Let's see. Should I just start from the beginning?
No, it's okay. You can continue, please.
Okay. Okay, thank you. So, anyway, I didn't start out as a young adult novelist. I started out as an English teacher. And like a lot of English teachers I know and a lot of writers I know, I fell in love with reading as a child. My mother took me to the public library once a week, me and my two younger sisters, and we chose our books for the week and returned the next week and chose more books. And ever since I could hold a pencil, really, I've loved the act of putting it to paper. I write now on a computer just because it's a lot more efficient, but for a long time, for years, and I've written all my life, I wrote by hand. And I know a lot of writers don't do that anymore, but it's a lovely feeling. I'm a person who still writes letters to friends and that sort of thing. So I'm a bit old school when it comes to the YA scene. I know how to tweet. I don't do it very much. I know how to connect with readers on Facebook, but to be honest, I feel like most of my biggest fans have been librarians and English teachers. My novel, Paper Covers Rock, the first one, it takes place at an all-boys boarding school, and my protagonist, Alex, is a 17-year-old boy who learns during his junior year that he has a gift for writing, and his English teacher, as she begins to encourage that gift, he begins to try to hide this secret from her that he feels like she's onto, and it's a bit of a cat and mouse game. But because I guess because my books, both of them, take place in schools and have characters who are at sort of a spiritual or moral crossroad, there are a lot of layers to them. My characters, they're real people, and I would like to think they think like teenagers. I've been accused of making my characters sound too smart, but as a former teacher for 17 years, I can tell you that I taught people who were just as smart, if not smarter. So when I was teaching, I, of course, was trying to teach young people how to write. And when I sat down to do it myself, I had to practice what I preached. Otherwise, I would be a hypocrite. And so the first book I wrote took me 6 years on and off to write. When I got down to business on it and retired from teaching so that I could get down to business on it, I was able to work every day, which was a major luxury. And so that is sort of how, oh my gosh, I'm just rambling here. It's so hard to talk about what the process of that first book was like, because it was so long in the making. But I will tell you that at the end of it all, I had a compelling novel, thanks to my editor and my agent, that was a finalist for a major literary award. It's called the William C. Morris Award. It's the award for the best debut novel that came out in YA literature that year. But I would never have gotten there had I not rewritten and rewritten and rewritten this book. It started out, I rewrote it at least 3 times over from 3 different points of view until I found the right voice and the right teller. Alex wasn't always my narrator. For a long time, the narrator was the young English teacher, Miss Dovecott, and I just couldn't get that story going. Plus, it wouldn't have been young adult had it stayed in her voice. But my editor at Random House liked it a lot, and so they signed me to a 2-book deal without ever having read any of the second book, because I hadn't written the second book. And that was something that I had to do within a 2-year time period, which was a lot of pressure because my first book had done well, and now people were paying attention to me, whereas before nobody knew who I was. I also wrote that second book, which is called And We Stay, in a few different points of view before I landed on the right one. So if you're a struggling writer out there and you hit a wall in your story, I would suggest that you start the story from a different spot in another character's voice, a character who's already in the book, and you will not believe how many avenues that will open up for you. It has worked like a charm for me 2 times, and now I'm working on my third book, and I've had to do it with that one too. For some reason, that's just become an element of my process. I think any writer who wants to be taken seriously is going to need to be willing to revise and rewrite and take constructive criticism. If you have friends who are writers, I would suggest starting a writers group, maybe once a month. I think once a week when you're young and in school, in high school or college, is probably unrealistic, but that way it'll keep you on a schedule. I think the hardest part of becoming a writer for me was disciplining myself to sit down and do it every day. I think that there are plenty of writers out there who have talent, who are more talented than I am, certainly, but they don't have the discipline that I do. And that is really, really what it takes to get yourself going. I like to write books, as I said, that have a realistic feel. I don't have the imagination, I don't think, to create complete other universes with other landscapes and other languages and other, powers. My characters are human, that is to say they are flawed, but they are essentially good people. And so I would like to think that at the end of the day, my novels will give readers, teen readers, hope that yes, yes, you're going to struggle, but there is going to be some help for you. There is going to be hope for you, and you can go through something really, really awful and come out on the other end a stronger and better person for it. Should I stop here and take questions, or?
Please continue, Ms. Hubbard.
Okay. I guess that I'm 49 years old, and so I didn't really get serious about writing until I was 30. I like to call myself a writer, but I really wasn't doing it very often. And so I think that what has helped me, other than the 17 years of teaching English, is reading. I think that all writers are voracious readers, or should be, and that is not to say that you need to read everything in the YA genre, if that's the genre you are aiming for, or in the thriller genre. You need to read widely and pay attention to what's going on in the newspaper. Believe it or not, I've gotten some great storylines, and I also write plays, but great storylines from the New York Times, the obituaries. I know that's morbid, but I'm telling you, there are some fascinating people out there who live fascinating lives, and You just need to be paying attention to what's going on around you. I love to take a notebook into a restaurant or a coffee shop and listen in on people's conversations. It's a little bit Harriet the Spy-esque, which was one of my favorite books growing up. But listening is huge, and it really helps to get the dialogue right. Dialogue is hard to write anyway, but to make it sound realistic is one of the hardest things that I face as a writer. The other hard thing for me is plot, and getting storylines from other sources helps. Reading mysteries helps. Keeping the pace moving. That's I read a lot of mysteries just for that reason, just to sort of train myself in the sense of suspense and pace, making the reader want to turn the page. I think that you will want to know that I've thrown away hundreds and hundreds of pages that I've written. It is so hard to do, but you cannot be that in love with your own words. In fact, I threw away a whole book that I finished because it just wasn't good. And as my agent can tell you, you've got to practice writing like you practice a sport, and you're not going to go out and be a professional golfer in the first year, in the second year of playing. I mean, it takes patience, it takes perseverance. I have 2 novels, 3 novels now in a drawer that will never see the light of day, I hope at least, because they were practice. They were my, what I did to get ready for the real thing. So that's important, and it's important to know that you are never going to get it right the first time, unless it is literally something handed down from some higher being. The funny thing about writing is, and the fun thing about writing is, that sometimes you don't quite know what you want to say until you sit down and start saying it. And then the more you write into it, the clearer it becomes. And that's why you've got to go back a lot of times and cut out paragraphs, pages, sentences. Less is more. You don't want to dummy down to your reader. You don't want to tell them twice, especially when you're writing fiction. You need to trust that the reader can keep up with you, but you also need to give the reader a fair shot. I think a lot of young writers make the mistake of equating deepness with ambiguity or obscurity. And as Robert Frost, a poet, said, I want to write poems that can be understood. I want to be a writer who can be understood. You can be simple and deep at the same time. You can be clear and deep at the same time. You can be smart and deep at the same time. But you've just read the people who have succeeded, and you'll understand a little bit more about how to do that. How are we doing?
We're doing great. Thank you so much for everything that you've shared with us so far.
You're welcome. Is there something you'd like for me to share that I haven't shared yet?
Maybe talking about how to write about real life experiences without so obvious.
How to do it? Well, I think everybody is the star in his or her own movie. I think it's hard to write about yourself. I think it's much more, um, much easier to create a character who might have pieces of you, but who does not live your life, who lives another life. For example, my character in And We Stay, my main character is a 17-year-old girl named Emily Beam. Now, Emily Beam has, at the start of the book, a boyfriend who walks into the public school library to find her and threatens to shoot her. He doesn't end up doing that, but I've never had that happen to me, but I've certainly followed the news. I've certainly been in libraries, and to create that environment, that wasn't so difficult. Emily Beam goes off as a result of this incident. She is shipped off to a girls' school in Amherst, Massachusetts, which is the hometown of Emily Dickinson. Emily Beam is the story takes place in 1995. Emily Dickinson lived in the mid-1800s. I, as an English teacher, was not as enamored of Emily Dickinson's work as I thought I should be. And so, because I wanted to sort of examine myself, what is wrong with me? Why don't you like Emily Dickinson like every other English teacher, you know? I decided to have Emily Beam become fascinated with Emily Dickinson, and in the process, I became fascinated with Emily Dickinson. And so a lot of times I will give my characters a trait that I would like to have, or I will have them pursue knowledge that I would like to have, just because it's fun to learn, fun to explore. And so those are a couple of things I've done. In the book that I'm working on now, I have a real fascination with art and art history, and so I'm working that into my book because it's something I want to learn more about.
Thank you, Miss Hubbard.
You're welcome. It's Alexis, right?
Yes, it is.
And are you a writer?
Yes, I am.
How's that going?
It's been going all right. I'm working on a young adult novel at present.
Yes. Is it a fantasy novel, or is it more grounded in realism?
It's more grounded in realism.
Yes, it's hard. What's the hardest thing for you right now?
I think the hardest thing is trying to make sure that it remains a story rather than writing about my own life.
Yes, giving it a plot, sort of. Sometimes I think that um, I can write characters all day long and about their inner lives. That comes really easily to me. But putting them in a story that moves along, that has a rising action and a falling action, that is not my forte. And that's what my editor helps me with, when I've been in writing groups, because I know that it's a weakness of mine. I can tell people, okay, watch out for this, and see if you think I'm achieving it. One thing that I've learned about myself as a writer is the longer I do it, the more easy it is to pinpoint my weaknesses, which is a huge asset, because I can then when I go back and try to read as objectively as I can, which of course is difficult anytime you're reading your own work, I at least know what my tendencies are and can either fix it myself or show them to someone and say, do you think this is working? Do you think this is not? So that's a really long-winded comment, but yeah, it's hard to find. I live in a small southern town, and there are a lot of fascinating characters around here, but there isn't a whole lot that happens, and that's why I like to read newspapers and little news of the weird sorts of things. And that often gives me a plot idea. What you want to remember always for your protagonist in young adult fiction, and any fiction really, is that you want your protagonist to be active. You want that girl or that boy to be making the decisions. You don't want a passive protagonist. You don't want life happening to him or her. You want him or her to make life happen. These characters make choices. Sometimes they're good, sometimes they're bad, but those choices have consequences in that, and that's one thing that gets your story going. That's one thing that creates the conflict, is when your character is faced with a big decision and pulls the trigger, metaphorically speaking. Did that help, Alexis?
Yes, that really helped. Thank you, Ms. Hubbard.
You're welcome. So I'm trying to think of other techniques I've used when I've gotten stuck. I've told you about the changing the point of view. Another thing that has worked for me, and I got this from John Irving, the novelist John Irving. He writes the last page first and then starts the book to get to that last page, and writes all the way up to that closing. I think that's a really cool exercise. I did it with Paper Covers Rock, and it worked beautifully. I also write with images in my head and let the pictures, the things that I see, drive the story along. I am also a poet. That's what I started out doing. That was my first, success as a writer. And so I think my work is very image driven because of that, and it's also very spare and economical. Like I said, I think less is more when it comes to storytelling, and one way you can challenge yourself after you've written a story or half of a book is to go back and cut out everything that doesn't move the story along. That's what editors do. That's what my editor in New York does for me, and but I'm getting a lot better about doing it myself. I write about 50-page chunks at a time before I stop and go back and revise. That's because I'm old and I sometimes can't remember little details, so I need to refresh my memory. But that's I know other writers who do that too. They just write in chunks. Don't censor yourself too early. That's a mistake I've made, and I've deleted things that I wish I hadn't deleted. You can now, with computers, keep everything on record, which is lovely. Don't throw anything away until you're done. Do we have any questions?
Yeah. One of them would be about the covers of your books and how they came about.
Yes. Writers don't get to choose their covers. And what, as a person who, for good or for bad, judges a book by its cover, I have a hard time with that. I do have in my contract that my agent drew up cover approval, which means that I can veto something. It's not something that as a writer you should do very often, because the people in publishing know way more about marketing, way more about how to sell a book with a cover than you do. But you still want the cover to reflect the mood of the book, the interior of the book. I have a bit of an issue with, I'm trying to get my cover up here so you can see it, with putting faces on on the covers of books. I worry that it keeps readers away if the person on the cover doesn't necessarily look like them, or doesn't represent their world. I didn't want a face on my narrator for Paper Covers Rock, but I got that anyway, and they explained to me that because this is essentially a book about boys, the inner life of boys, that they thought it best to put a rather handsome young man on the cover. This kid's way better looking than Alex is in the book, but that's okay, because the primary readers of young adult fiction are girls, and girls are drawn to attractive boys on cover of books. So there you go. My second book, Paper Covers Rock, this cover is absolutely perfect. I love this cover. I loved it from the get-go. It sets the mood. It doesn't show Emily's face. It has a little bit of a throwback feel to Emily Dickinson. Everything about it is exquisite to me, and so that's the funny thing about covers, and sometimes they'll even change them once the book comes out in paperback. That doesn't happen with my books, but you'll notice that it happens sometimes. And perhaps it's because the initial cover did not do the work that the marketing department thought it should do. But that's my little insight on covers, book covers. So if you do get published, then ask for cover approval in your contract. Okay. Any other questions?
Yeah. Miss Hubbard, have you ever considered collaborating with another author or writer?
Wow. That is a really good question. I have never even thought about it. Now, I know it goes on in young adult fiction, and I'm sure it's a lot of fun, but I'm a bit of a control freak, and I have a certain style and aesthetic that I feel like I'm trying to cultivate and make my own, and to have someone else come in with their own style and their aesthetic and try to merge the two, I think would be very difficult. It might be something that I would want to do in 10 years when I've had more experience and feel comfortable enough with where I am as a writer. But I think I'm still learning. I think that writers want to keep challenging themselves, and for example, by making the structure more complicated, and making the plot more layered, I still have a lot to learn, and I don't feel like I should collaborate until I've got a few more tools under my belt. Do you know? Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Alexis.
Oh, no, you go ahead, Miss Hubbard.
I don't read a lot of young adult fiction, but I have to say I just finished about a month ago The Fault in Our Stars, which I'm sure everybody else has read. A fabulous book. It really lives up to the hype. I haven't seen the movie. I'm not sure I want to, but there are a lot of really wonderful YA writers out there who are so careful with their structure, with their language, with making it all work and making everything tight. Elizabeth Wine is wonderful. Patricia McCormick. These are not necessarily your best-selling YA authors, but I've certainly learned from them and have a lot of respect for the way they put their stories together. Who are some of the writers you like, Alexis?
I like a good variety. I really do like John Green, Rainbow Rowell. You're really, really good. You're one of my favorites.
Yeah. Let's see if I'm on. Rainbow Rowell, I'm so glad you mentioned her. Eleanor and Park was my favorite book that I read last year. She is so good and just charming and different and accessible. Very she's got a long future ahead of her, I think.
Yeah, I think so as well. Another question that I got for you was, how do you deal with good reviews and bad reviews? How do those affect you in your writing?
Well, I'm not going to be one of those people like at the Academy. I read reviews, but I learned the hard way not to read reviews on Goodreads because I completely respect book reviewers who know what they're doing, who've read a lot in the particular genre, who are educated, who use grammar and punctuation correctly. But I've come across some reviews that I felt were just uninformed. The writer was uninformed in some capacity, and so I decided rather than to read those and stew about it for a minute or two, I just wouldn't put myself out there in that way. My editor at Random House sends me all of what I call quote-unquote legitimate reviews, and I do read all of those and take them to heart. I mean, you learn just as much from a positive review as you do from a negative review, and it's like when I go see plays, I learn as a writer as much seeing a bad play as I do a bad script as I do seeing a good script. So I'm certainly open to criticism, but the person criticizing me, I feel, needs to be someone who's got a background, who's in that field, in that area.
I think that's really good and really interesting how you deal with that.
Well, you've got to deal with it in some way.
If you were to go into another genre, would you go into adult fiction, or what genre interests you the most?
I think I would go into adult fiction just because I have wanted to do that already with this third book that I'm writing, because I want to take the characters into their college lives and a little bit after, and it's you know, for it to remain young adult, which you know, now I'm pegged as a young adult author. I can't do that, and it's a bit limiting. Because I'm so interested in relationships and the psychology of relationships, I think I am probably an adult novelist at heart. I just happen to write a couple of books where teenagers were at the forefront, and I loved teaching. I taught high school, and and college, a little bit of college. I feel very, very removed now, 7 years later, from the teenage world. I have a niece who's 17, and thank goodness for her, because she's a go-to source for me often. So I think that the longer I'm away from teenagers, the less I will probably have to say about the worlds that they have to navigate.
The last question I think we have for this afternoon would be, how did it feel after you had written your first book?
Well, of course, it feels satisfying to finish a book. You do feel a little bit bereft. I felt especially bereft, lonely, after I finished my second book, And We Stay, because I missed being in that world. It's a world where girls are good to each other, where poetry is a saving grace. It was a very positive place, and whereas in the first book, Paper Covers Rock, the boys' boarding school, not a nurturing place, not necessarily the best environment for this young man who was living there. So that is a really good question. I'll tell you what felt really good is when my agent told me that that book, Paper Covers Rock, had been sold. I was at the beach. I was on vacation with my husband, and I jumped around the living room for about 10 minutes screaming, and that's a feeling unlike no other, because this is something that you've imagined it for years, and suddenly it happens to you, and it's neat because I'm just a normal person. I mean, I'm not, I do the laundry, I cook dinner, I mow the lawn. I mean, it's just I feel very, very fortunate, and I think every writer has to have a little bit of luck on her side. Thank you, Alexis.
Thank you so much, Ms. Hubbard. You were amazing. Thank you. Thank you to all of you who tuned in to watch. Please go to our website to hear more news about our upcoming events, and have a good afternoon. Bye, Ms. Hubbard. Thank you so much for coming to join us.
You're welcome.